Hello, listeners. Kathy Lawless, Life Story Curator, bringing you the podcast series, How Did I Get Here? A series of interviews designed for people just starting out in their careers, people in transition, or possibly feeling stuck, and giving them access to the stories of people who have been there, done that, so that they might be inspired with some new ideas, or maybe just comforted knowing they are not alone, that everybody starts somewhere and everybody goes through times of transition and times when they feel stuck. Today, I'm very excited to be interviewing Carol Ross, who is a leadership coach, healer, and writer. Welcome, Carol.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm delighted to be here.
And I met Carol at a kind of an interesting situation. We met at a celebration of life for a mutual friend of ours and just got to talking. And I was so fascinated with what she does today that I know that her journey in getting here is going to be equally fascinating. So anyway, before we get into what you're doing today, Carol, tell us about, I always like to start with the icebreaker. So tell us about where you grew up, what part of the country or the world, and a little bit about your family dynamic, siblings, birth order, that kind of thing, and how you think where you grew up and birth order and all that shaped you as an individual.
Sure. So I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is a town of about 250,000 people. I'm the listeners probably can't tell this, but I am Asian American. And so growing up in a Midwestern town in the 1960s, I was a bit of an anomaly. I like to say that there were exactly 3 Asian American families in that town of Fort Wayne, and we were all related. And so that environment really shaped me in terms of being acutely aware of when I didn't fit in and who I could trust. And also that it is possible to cross worlds and to be a bridge between worlds. And that's part of my story, I think.
Yeah.
I grew up the youngest of 4 children, and so I have an older sister and 2 older brothers. And if you interviewed them, they would say I was very bossy as a child. So,
That's funny. One of my last interviews said she was the oldest youngest, that she was the youngest in her family, but she had all the traits of the oldest. So it sounds like that was you too.
yeah, I think one of my older brothers would often say, "You're not the boss of me."
Ah, well, and it's interesting that at a young age you were kind of self-aware of those things that you just mentioned, because as young people, a lot of times we're rarely self-aware, let alone of something that's so impactful like that. I love that. So, okay, well,
Yeah,
so go ahead.
I was just going to say it was a gift for me, I think, to grow up in a world where I had to make my way, like I had to make my way through the world, because it gave me such confidence as an adult. And so I see those kinds of challenging circumstances as gifts, because how else do you create independence if only by you have to make your way through.
Yeah, yeah. Someone can't create independence for you, can they? They can
Right.
create dependence.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So, are you bilingual?
I wish I was, but interestingly enough, my parents would speak to us in Chinese at home, and we would answer in English. And because we were in an English speaking community, it's like we didn't actually they didn't force us to use Chinese back in terms of replying. So I can understand a lot of Cantonese, but I can't really recall it enough to speak it fluently.
Oh, okay. So you're living in two worlds again, and from a language
Yes,
perspective, and
yes, that's
as well
right.
as probably a culture, and like you said about bridging and trying to fit in and seeing where you fit in and where you didn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did you do for activities as a young person? Were you involved in sports or
Mm.
theater or music or?
I played the flute, so music was a big part of my life, and that also ended up being part of my social life. I can remember going to band camps and band trips, and so I was in the marching band. I was in the pit orchestra, so musicals. So anything that had to do where you could have a musical instrument, I was probably involved in youth orchestras, and that provided a community of people for me, especially I'm going to say in high school and junior high. So um,
Yeah, a
I,
way for
I
you to fit
I
in, right?
yeah, exactly, exactly. I did play tennis. I wasn't all that great, so I can't say that I grew up athletic at all. That wasn't something that I was drawn to. So, but I do remember summer evenings in the backyard and playing like all kids probably in the 60s. Playing kickball and tag, freeze tag, and croquet. So kind of the stuff that kids do on their own and with other kids, I
Yeah.
remember doing.
I was of that same 60s generation. And yeah, it was all about you. You know, parents were like, you got to be outside. What are you doing inside? You got to be outside doing stuff. And we had to figure out for ourselves what to do, right? There wasn't so much of these planned activities like there is today,
That's
or
right.
video games and stuff. So, okay. So shifting gears a bit here, are you an introvert, an extrovert, or an ambivert?
I'm an ambivert. So I do like when I've done the Myers-Briggs, I'm on the border of E and I, and more a little bit on the I side, introvert. So I do know that I need my time alone to recharge, but I do enjoy being with people, and that's part of the reason why the profession that I'm in right now is so people intensive, is because it does give me energy. So
Yeah.
I'm both.
Yeah, I'm on that line too. It's funny, when I was in corporate, I probably needed more of my introvert time to recharge. And now that I'm a
Mm,
solopreneur, I need more people to recharge because I have so much time kind of solo. Yeah,
yes.
definitely. I love when I learned about this ambivert category. I'm like, oh, that's me. It's nice to have our own category versus saying, well, I'm kind of in the middle. I'm the middle child. So I tend to be on the middle of a lot of those personality tests. So,
Ah,
okay. So another scale on the fun meter on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being couch potato and 5 being life of the party. Where do you put yourself?
oh gosh. That's a hard one. You know, I would say I'm probably a 3, but I'll say it's like 3 in terms of how people might perceive me, because I'm not the life of the party. But when I'm out and about, I'm enjoying myself as if I were the life of the party. Does that make
Oh,
sense?
so in your own mind, you're the life of the party. That's awesome.
Well, in terms of how I feel,
Yeah.
it's very joyful, but it's also, um, for other people, they might not see that uh, all that joy. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, and probably some people have different visions of what life of the party is, right? Um,
yes,
so they may not see it either.
yeah,
Okay. Okay. So
yeah.
then on the risk meter scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low
Uh-huh.
risk taker, 5 being high risk taker, where do you put yourself?
So I'm gonna divide that up if that's okay. Is that all right?
Sure.
Because I think of it as physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. And so I know physically on risk taking, I'm not very adventurous. Like you're not going to find me bungee jumping, and I gave up skiing a few years ago because of I'm afraid of falling. So on a physical level, I'm probably like a 2. But if you look at emotionally and intellectually and spiritually, I'm probably a 5.
Ah, I get it. Thanks for the clarification on that. And I can tell you, a lot of people do answer that question in 2 ways, kind of business or professional, or sometimes they're like, oh, I'm
Mm.
an adrenaline junkie, but then in my business life, I'm this way, or professional life. So I love that you had those 4 categories, though, and how you view the world. And by the way, these 2 questions I find so fascinating because they really kind of set the stage for us, and then as we start to hear your story, those things will start to play out, and we'll get a we'll be able to gauge your self score, and we might decide to score you differently in one of those categories.
Oh, I love that you have that kind of metric there. So that's great.
All right. Well, Carol, tell us what it's like to be a leadership coach, healer, and writer. And then we'll get into how did I get here?
Hmm. Yeah. So I'd say that my days are pretty varied because I work with both individuals and groups, and and I work in different modalities as well. So when I'm working with groups, I'm much more of a facilitator and sometimes trainer. I just did a session yesterday with an organization where we're with a colleague. I'm co-leading a series of workshops around emotional fitness, and we're trying to give these employees the skills around emotional fitness so they can be more resilient with their stakeholders, with their customers. And so in that case, I'm imparting information. So I'm a little bit of doing teaching, and I'm also facilitating. I'm doing demonstrations. I'm answering questions and seeing how it is the audience is actually reacting to the material. When I'm doing leadership coaching, we go all over the board because it is very personal. Like leaders have whole lives, and it's not just about the business. And we can start to see patterns that play out in their personal life that spill over into business and vice versa. So it's much more of kind of the story, that you're so deeply steeped in, Kathy. It's like knowing more of the story of that person and what makes them tick, and also seeing where they hold themselves back internally. So much of what we create out in the world is driven by how we treat our inner world, our beliefs, our emotions, our feelings, our attitudes. And so to be able to step into someone's inner world is a real privilege.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then I do the healing work with my coaching clients in a way that is about me getting out of my thinking brain, my thinking mind, and allowing my heart to come fully through. And this is part of the work that I've evolved into over many years, and it's fascinating to me, and it's mysterious and mystical at times, and magical. And so that's the kind of the new wrinkle around the work that I've been doing with individuals. In the writing piece, I love to write, and like many writers, it's hard for me to get myself to sit down and be still enough to write. But it's almost a practice of self-coaching. When I'm writing, I'm making meaning of my life. It's a very internal thing, and I write for myself first. While it's helpful for others when I'm writing, that's usually personal essays. It's um, it's a healing process for myself to write. And most recently, I wrote about the death of my mother in April and her decline, and what that actually did in terms of transforming me in her passing. And it was deeply personal, but it also struck a chord with my audience as well. And that's the kind of writing that is so satisfying. It's cathartic for me, and then others can learn from my experience and also resonate and share their experience with me as well.
Wow, there's so many pieces of what you get to do, but I can tell, and this is what I think I connected with when you and I met in person, was you're definitely in your genius zone, and you continue to just stay in that and find it. And by writing, you probably get stronger at your own healing, but then that gives you stronger healing others. And wow. And I love what you said too about the leaders, about what we put out in the world is kind of how we are treating ourselves. And sometimes we're not putting everything out there, which then
Yes.
causes the people around us to not know us, right? And maybe make things up about us, which if they knew us, then maybe they wouldn't have to do that. So fascinating.
Well, and there's another wrinkle to that too, and that is that we give others grace when we give ourselves grace first. And the best leaders have enough, I'm going to say, humility to know that they deserve grace as well. But oftentimes it's hard to get to that place where we can be so driven that we don't give compassion to ourselves, and then it makes it harder to give compassion to other people
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, it
because
sure
because
does. Mhm.
because where our well has run dry. I experienced that in parts of my life where my well ran dry, and I wasn't a very nice person to be around.
Yeah. How do you bring that energy in your best self if you're not feeling that, or giving yourself compassion? Yeah, I went through a point of no compassion for myself, and I actually had a coach me through that. Um,
Mm,
some compassionate self-forgiveness, which sounded
yes.
so funny when I first started with it, but boy, it sure was necessary, and it sure worked. So,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. There are just so many ideas that are coming up for me as we're talking. I want to just make one other point, and that is that I think that our path as human beings is to be able to receive more and more love, and that allows us to give more and more love.
yeah, yeah, we're so busy doing all the time, right? Maybe we're not receiving and giving ourselves grace and others grace. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Carol, I love what you do, but I'm curious, is this something that you always wanted to do, or how you got to this place? So when you think back, junior high, high school, I'm going to take you a little back to those days. What did you want to be when you grew up? Did you think you were going to be a writer or a leadership coach or a healer?
No, not at all. I would have. Well, and you probably get that answer from most of the people that you interview.
Yeah,
When
probably
you're
95%.
when you're young, it's almost like what you aspire to is only what you know. And so in my family, I grew up with engineers and and scientists, kind of people who were drawn to more the technical world. And so when I was young, I wanted to be a chemical engineer. That was what I set my sights on. And it wasn't specifically because I loved chemistry or engineering, but I saw that as a path forward for me where I could be competent and I could be independent.
Ah, yeah, that is interesting. I remember being part of a women's leadership seminar, and that phrase, if you can see it, you can be it, was so prominent, and it really struck a chord with me. And I guess, and it strikes a chord, I think, for a lot of women, right? Is this, when you're in business or if you're in a certain industry and you don't see any women in your group or women that you can aspire to be like, sometimes it's hard to then envision any other way of being than just what you're seeing.
Yes. Yeah. And I would say, fortunately, like my parents were good role models for, becoming more of a woman in technology. My father never put any bias between his sons and daughters as to what they could do. It wasn't like, well, because you're a girl, you can only do this. I never got that feeling at all. And my mother went back to school when she was in her 40s to become a draftsman. And so she showed me that you can, go to school and learn what you need to be whatever you wanted to be.
And at whatever age, that's a great role model.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So take us through your career path then. So did you get that chemical engineering degree, or did you change like midstream, or?
No, I got a chemical engineering degree. So I graduated from Northwestern, which is located in the Chicago area, and I got a job right out of school at a nuclear power plant about 60 miles south of Chicago, kind of out in the boonies, at a plant that was still under construction. And my job, that first job, was to test out the sump pumps in this power plant that was under construction. And then later on, I moved into the chemistry department and helped to set up kind of their uh, detection of radiation equipment in the plant. It was, I'm going to say, a pretty big shock to my system to go from kind of the ivory towers of higher education to a plant that was under construction with 3,000 unionized workers and just a handful of professional women. And here I was, like 21, 22 years old, with a hard hat and steel-toed shoes to get to my office, and an Asian American at the same time. It was one of the hardest transitions I think I've had to make, because it brought me back to my own humanity. It got me to the place where I couldn't just rely on my thinking brain, and it gave me a lot of humility.
And back to probably your when you were very young, right? That whole, do I fit in? How do, and then, but now you had to kind of prove yourself. I'm guessing there was a whole element of that, being a woman, and then probably an Asian woman. Um,
Yes.
wow. And in
Yeah,
such a space of maybe more, uh, you know, manufacturing or factory like environment versus a school environment.
that's right. It was a very macho oriented environment, because even the male engineers came out of the Navy nuclear program. Many of the people in the control room had come straight from the Navy submarines. so,
Ah,
um, it was, I would say, a pretty rough environment for a young woman engineer to be in. I used to say that it was hard to find a best friend there. And I'll say I lasted 3 years, and I went back to grad school at that point, because I knew that I didn't want to be a plant engineer anymore.
yeah, you
And
start.
That was like my ticket out, was to go back to grad school. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's got to be so hard to you're so isolated, right? If you're not finding, I mean, a lot of times in that first job is where you find those really close friends, and now you've all these great colleagues, but maybe that wasn't the case for you. So yeah, it's more of a struggle right out of the gate than
Yes.
enjoyment.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So I went back to school. I went back to Northwestern and got my master's degree in industrial engineering, with a concentration in operations research. And out of there, I got through campus interviewing, got recruited to a company called Bell Communications Research out in New Jersey, which was the R&D for the baby bells. If you remember that breakup of AT&T in 1984, I think it was, long, long time ago, where each of the telephone companies got broken up into 7 distinct regions across the U.S. and so their R&D was concentrated in this company called Bell Communications Research, or Bellcore was the name of it. And so for me, that was it was lovely being around professional, educated engineers who were curious and were interesting, and had similar values that I had. And I had never lived on the East Coast before. So that was a little bit of an adventure for myself and my husband.
Ah, yeah. So you're not in the middle of nowhere like you were before, not so
Yes,
isolated.
yes,
Well,
yes,
and with
yeah,
people who are more like you from a background perspective and education perspective, and that probably valued those things as well. Whereas where it sounds like maybe before, when you were in your prior job, they valued the track they came up, not when people come up other tracks, right?
that's right. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, that's right. So, and just being on the East Coast and being close to New York City, and just seeing the diversity of what's available there, of the people and the resources, the museums, the neighborhoods. That was just like taking it all in. Every weekend, I can remember going into the city, and then coming back out of the Holland Tunnel on the New Jersey side, and breathing a sigh of relief, actually, because it was just like teeming with people, And so,
Yeah.
you want to be a visitor, but you wouldn't want to live there.
Yeah, yeah, totally get it. Totally get it. It's fascinating, and you love seeing it and being part of it for a bit. And you're like, but I got to get back to my comfort zone.
Yes, yes, that's right. So, and then from there, we stayed for 3 years, and again, it was kind of like, okay, time for another adventure. My husband and I knew that I could transfer to any of the headquarters for these companies across the U.S. that owned the R&D that I worked for, and so we considered a couple different places, and we ended up in Denver, and we've been here for over 30 years now. It's been a good place to live.
Wow. So how did you pick Denver?
Well, partly my brother had been living here, and we had come out to visit and to ski, and we had this impression, like many people do, that Denver is really cold and snowy, and it can be, but we also were here in February where it was 70 degrees and sunny, and we were like, wow, this is pretty good.
Yeah, coming
So
from the East Coast, which is probably somewhat gray in February.
yes, yes, that's right. So partly it was the weather, partly because my brother was here at the time. He later moved away and then came back. And partly the wide open spaces. I mean, there was just such a breath of fresh air of coming to the Denver area 30 years ago after being on the East Coast, which felt very crowded. And uh, we fell in love with the place.
And then that's why you've not left, right? Stayed here. But sounds like from being such an engineering world and then now into coaching and healing and writing, how did that transition happen? I'm guessing there's some more steps here. I'm probably skipping ahead.
There are. So I actually worked for a company called US West, which was
Oh
the
yeah.
local telephone provider in the Denver, Colorado area. So I was there for about 6 years and got laid off. And when I got laid off, I went to Lucent Technologies and was there for 6 years and got laid off. And and during that time, I'm going to say that's when I started to move more into my heart, started to learn more about myself and my emotions. I had a long period, Kathy, of discomfort, and it started with just shoulder and neck being tight, but it then moved into my jaw, and so I had TMJ, if you're familiar with that,
Hmm.
where your jaw can lock up. I was grinding my teeth at night, and a lot of it had to do with suppressing emotions over my lifetime. It was a case where my family didn't talk about emotions, but we knew they were there. We could feel it. And it wasn't something that got released easily. It got more stuffed down. So by the time I was in my 30s and I was working for US West, the TMJ started to really interfere with my life. And by the time I got to Lucent Technologies, it was so painful that I remember going out to restaurants and saying, "What's the softest thing I can eat?" It was that bad.
Wow.
So
Wow.
yeah, so I would say that my healing journey started when I realized that this problem was not just physical, but it was emotional. And at some point, the pain was bad enough that I saw a surgeon, and he said, I don't know why someone hasn't told you before, but this is an open and shut case. You need surgery. And so he operated on my jaw. And once I was out of that physical pain, I feel like that surgeon really saved my life because my life was pretty miserable at that point. And once I was out of the physical pain, then I knew that it was time to tackle the emotional pain. So I went into therapy for about a good 18 months, and all the stuff, that I had just stuffed down over years, um, just came out. I picked the right vocation early in life as an engineer because you didn't need feelings.
Yeah.
It was all about like, are you correct and accurate?
Mhm.
and and it wasn't about feelings at all. I mean, it was to some extent, but you could get by without kind of knowing your underlying feelings. But I also knew that that was holding me back, and it was cutting off a part of myself to cut off the emotional piece. So once I went into therapy, I started to take more workshops that were offered to me, and at work, actually, personal development workshops, personal growth kinds of things. And so when I was at Lucent Technologies is when I made the shift to what I say, instead of working with technical systems, I started working with human systems. I saw an
Yeah.
opportunity.
Mhm.
At the time, I was doing software engineering and I was working on a systems test team. So it's like the testing out the software after it's been written by the programmers, but before it goes to the customer. And these software programs were millions of lines of code long, so big, big programs. And we had uh, uh, a set of 20 to 25 system testers that would test out the software. So I was on a large team and I realized, oh, there's an opportunity for team building here. So I would volunteer to facilitate. I was self-taught. I would just go to the library and start reading these journals, these organization development journals, and picking up things about how I could best use and apply to help teams be more effective. That was my entree to becoming more human centered and working with human systems. But I would say that my biggest pivot came when in the early 2000s, a lot of engineers were job hopping. They were going to other places that would pay even better. And so we were losing a lot of people that had 10, 20 years experience in the company, all this knowledge just walking out the door. And I remember saying to one of the VPs, I was just an individual contributor, I wasn't a manager. And I said, if you think this is a business problem, I think you should put some headcount on trying to figure out how to retain people. And the person just kind of brushed me off and said, oh, go see so and so. And around that time, there was a book that came out called First Break All the Rules by the Gallup organization. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it
I've
was,
heard the title. Yeah, I don't think I've read it.
yeah, it's a great book, and I consider it a classic. It was they studied why people left companies, and they figured out not only that managers were a key piece of why people stay or leave. Like people don't leave companies, they leave managers. But they also developed a set of 12 questions that could uh, predict retention, customer satisfaction. I mean, a whole host of business indicators from just 12 questions that their employees would answer. So when I looked at this, I thought, someone's got this figured out. They
Yeah.
know how to keep people.
Mhm.
And so at the time, I went to a manager who had just been transferred into a role of hiring engineers. He was an engineer himself, and the engineers don't trust the HR people, so they kind of say, well, we're going to do our own hiring. And so this manager was in charge of hiring engineers. I went to him and I said, it's not just about hiring people; you have to retain them as well. And he said, you're absolutely right. So if you write up your job description, I'll get the head count for you. And he was true to his word. So he did. I made up my own position called retention leader. And then I set about, like a good engineer, starting to study the problem and applying these tools that I discovered. I was really fortunate, Kathy, because I started to shift my identity and my job and my role uh, among a group of people who had already trusted me as a good engineer. And I was getting paid an engineer's salary while I was doing this. So fortunate to have people who would, come to brown bags, and I would say, okay, we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z, and just come and listen. And I touched a lot of lives there. I was really, really fortunate to have that time. Really fortunate when I think back on it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're in the right place at the right time with
Yes.
the right but also how you were approaching it really fit. You were adding value to the organization. Yeah,
Yes.
and but with a leading edge kind of way. Fascinating.
Yeah, it was. I implemented some things that were definitely ahead of their time. We had a meditation room, for example. This was in the late '90s, early 2000s. A meditation room for employees, and it came about because we had some Muslim practicing employees who they pray like 5 times a day, and they were doing it in front of their computers. And I said, no, 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 we can find a room that we'll just call the meditation room. You can come there. So that was one of the things I implemented. I remember asking people what was the best kind of reward and recognition they'd ever gotten, and it was handwritten thank you notes. So we started a thank you note program that not only was a way for people to express their gratitude, but be recognized for their thank you notes,
Yeah.
recognized for giving thanks. And one of the best things that I remember doing while I was there was um, I was in charge of onboarding people, new employees, and I said, well, okay, I'll do it, but I'm going to do it in a different way. I don't, like the HR people can deal with the legal stuff that people need to do when they're onboarding, but I want them to know the culture, and I want them to know the people at a deeper level. So I started a monthly what I call career development talks, and I would invite a VP, a first line manager, and then a technical guru, because there was a technical ladder here where you could aspire to be the top 1% of the technical population, and be recognized for it and be paid for it as well. And so I would ask those three people to come, three different people each month, and tell their career stories, and tell about their struggles and how they navigated their careers. And so people were just invited in to listen to these stories. I had people sit in a circle, and I would have them. I had some floating candles in the center, so that was like our little campfire, and then each person just talked, and I prepped them by saying, on the eve, just imagine on the eve of your retirement, what would you tell your grandkids about your career? What would you say to them? And we heard just some amazing stories, amazing
Yeah.
stories. And people
Wow.
would come month after month,
Yeah.
month after month.
Well, and what's interesting to me is that you probably wouldn't have been successful if you had come from HR.
Probably not.
It would have been,
Yeah.
oh, that's too woo woo, right?
Yeah.
That's too, and I've heard this before, like from a technology. When I kind of left my world and started going into other organizations, you look at, well, I have all these leadership transferable skills and relationship transferable skills, but I remember one gentleman telling me, well, kind of in our technology department, they really only value technology backgrounds and knowledge and thinking and all this. And I'm like, well, but what he was trying to do was break out of that, right? Because there's the whole communication and bridging the gap between technology and users and technology and customers and all these pieces. So, but yeah, in your case, I think the same thing, right? You were an engineer, you were part
Right.
of the group. So then you could say, well, this is what we need. And they kept saying yes and yes. And yeah, this is working great. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really a special time.
Wow.
And then I'll say, the story continues. Lucent spun off to Avaya. So Avaya was kind of the business systems for telecommunications. And after the dot-com bubble burst around 2002, they started laying off people. Avaya actually went from about 32,000 to 14,000 people in
Wow,
about
that's
two
big. That's
years.
50, that's over 50%.
Yeah, it was a pretty brutal, downsizing, and every quarter there would be layoffs. And so at this point, they don't need a retention leader. They're trying to get rid of people,
Yeah, oh,
right?
good point.
Yeah, and so I I was actually laid off at the end of 2002, and at that point I had already signed up for coaching training, and because I knew that I was essentially an internal organization development consultant for for Avaya, and then I knew that I wanted the coaching skills to complement. So I had signed up maybe a month or 2 months before I got laid off, and it was like perfect timing. I kind of got laid off and then went right into coaching training, and that was in 2003. Started the beginning of my career as an entrepreneur and coach and writer and now healer.
Wow. So it's um, probably a blessing then, the layoff, right? Were you at a point
Mm.
ready for that? I mean, you probably saw the layoff coming, but were you also kind of
Yes.
ready to do more in the coaching space than in what you were doing maybe in the engineering space, since you'd already created the new role for yourself? And
It's interesting because, and I think probably this is true for a lot of people. You get comfortable with the paycheck, right?
oh
You
yeah.
get comfortable with
Mhm.
the conditions, like people, right? You have an office, and so I, in my mind, was like, well, I'll leave in 18 months. I'll leave in a year, but it was like never like a stake in the ground to say I'm leaving by May 1st, right? And
Yeah.
so the layoff actually was a blessing in disguise because they kicked me out of the nest and I was ready to fly. I just didn't realize it, and it was too fearful to actually say I'm leaving. So it was a good thing that I got laid off, and I was ready. I remember my supervisor on the last day walking me. She was helping me move my stuff out of my office out to the car, and she was lamenting like, oh, this is too soon for you to leave. And I said, no, it's not too soon. It's just the right time. I knew at that point, like, no, this is a sign I'm ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, Carol, I could keep asking you questions all afternoon, but we really do have to start wrapping up. I can't believe that
Yeah.
45 minutes, almost 50 minutes have gone by already. Um, so yeah, I feel like we're kind of at that point where you're where you are today. When you look back, share with us what you think has served you best over all this, overall your career in this time span. Was it a trait, a discipline, a talent, maybe a habit?
I think what's served me so well is to always be seeking a higher truth. I consider myself someone who digs and digs for the truth. And sometimes the truth is not pretty, but it is what makes us whole. And so when I have been resistant to the truth, that's when I've gotten myself into trouble. I burned out in 2011, so 10 years ago, as a coach, and I was not being true to myself. I was trying to be someone I wasn't, and I was so far away from who I really was. And to come back to the truth of who I am has been part of my healing journey from that burnout. But always it's been what's more true here in every situation. When I got laid off, what's more true? It wasn't about losing a job. It was actually about I was ready for a new adventure in both layoffs actually that I had. So it's been about this loyalty to seeking the truth.
Wow, I get that. And even at one point, you had such physical, um, physical ailments as a result of not being true to yourself. But then
Yes.
also it was another physical ailment that was also causing the pain. So,
Yes.
all
Yeah.
right. Well, and any words of wisdom that were impactful for you over your career that either, are your own words of wisdom that you use on yourself or others, or just that maybe there was a quote or maybe a boss or someone said to you that really helped you?
Hmm. Well, this sounds cliche, but it's be yourself. I don't know that I heard that specifically from any one person. Uh, I, yeah, I think that we pick up wisdom in all kinds of places, and then it kind of seeps into our consciousness or unconsciousness, and then to our consciousness. And so I can't point to any one particular piece of wisdom that's guided me throughout my career or has been stands out in terms of being impactful. But I think it is taking in wisdom from everyone uh, that we interact with, who we resonate with. And I'll just end here with the wisdom that I gained from our mutual friend. This is how we met at her memorial service. And I told this story at the memorial service that in our many conversations, I had written notes, and one of the notes I had written uh, about her wisdom, she said, "We are all walking miracles. Follow the miracles." And that has really touched me um, in terms of how to look at life and how to be with people and how to live a good life.
Wow, yeah, I love that. It's so funny. I have a quote, I get a daily quote in this set of cards. And the one that I pulled up today says, if we have never been amazed by the very fact that we exist, we are squandering the greatest fact of all. And that just stuck out for me when you said, she said, we are all miracles, follow the miracles. I mean, and we are, and we
Yeah,
take that for granted, right? Um, on the most elementary of levels, we take that for granted that we're all miracles, and we're
yes,
all about being and doing, and have we done enough and all of that. Yeah, can get
yes,
caught up.
yeah, that's right.
Well, Carol, thank you so much for sharing your story, but also your insight and your reflections and how you got here, because you never know who needed to hear this today. And that's what I love about these podcasts, is that people can tune in and they might be very just blown away by, oh, that could be me, or that's what's going on for me, or that really helped me get through something. So thank you for sharing that story.
Thank
That
you for
story being the story of your life, which is probably only a part of your life story.
thank you for doing this podcast, Kathy. It's a wonderful service to others.
Well, it is my pleasure. And so I guess we probably should wrap up for today. And listeners, if you enjoyed today's interview, please subscribe below so that you'll be alerted to other interviews as they're published. If you have any questions for me or would like to see this podcast interview online on my website, you can find it on lifestorycurator.com, which is where I'll also post Carol's social media information. So if you want to get in touch with her, or if you have any questions for her, you can post it there on my website or get a hold of her directly. So on that note, I guess I'll say stay safe, stay happy, and let's keep sharing those stories.